Meeting to order at 6:07 PM. If you're able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we have a roll call, please?
Johnson.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Mikulski.
Here.
Sabatini.
Here.
Leaks May.
Here. All right. Let's be where
We approve the agenda first or the?
Yeah, you can approve the agenda first. Really, you only need to adopt the alternative rules for the public hearing.
Okay.
So if you'd like, you can make that motion right before we open the public hearing.
got it. Okay, all right. All right.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so what we have now is we're at call to audience, where you have, well, because we didn't amend it, it's up to 5.
Yes, so the call to audience period remains the same on any topic, and then we'll do special.
Special for okay, got it, okay. So if you'd like to come up to the podium to speak on the topics on or off the agenda, please feel free to do that. I'm opening call to audience at 6:09 PM. Please state your name and address if you'd like.
Okay. Hello, Mayor Leaks May and Council. My name is Andrea Popovich. I live in 1445 Pinecrest Drive, and I'm here tonight because I care deeply about Ferndale and our neighbors, our children, and the trust that makes a community feel safe. I appreciate that the city is drafting a community input over government surveillance ordinance. That tells me you recognize that surveillance technology is not neutral and that it carries real privacy and civil liberty risks. But tonight I want to be very clear. This ordinance only protects residents if it has teeth, and if it is applied before surveillance technology is approved, not after. We recently ended our contract with Flock because of legitimate concerns about data access and privacy. That experience showed us how easily surveillance tools can shift away from community safety and toward broad monitoring of residents, including people who have done nothing wrong. Now the city is considering a new ALPR contract while this ordinance is still in draft form. That feels backwards. So here's what I and my neighbors need to understand. Does this ordinance actually prevent surveillance systems from being approved before public input? Does it legally restrict who can access our data, including outside agencies and federal authorities? Are data sharing limits enforceable, or are they just policies that can be changed quietly later? Who audits compliance, and what happens when the rules are broken? And does this protect all neighborhoods equally, including adjacent communities and children in parks and playgrounds? Cameras are cameras, even when they're called license plate readers. They still capture images of people, children, patterns, and movements. A camera is a camera is a camera. No one here is anti-safety. We all want a safe city. But more cameras do not equal less crime. Safety is built through trust, transparency, and community partnership. No rushed contract and after-the-fact oversight. Our city council and police department have the opportunity to lead here, to protect residents from unnecessary surveillance, to demand stronger regulations, and to put community first. Be those types of heroes. We need to work together. This is our community, our neighbors, our children, our world. Please slow down. Finalize strong protection first, and let the ordinance be a real shield for the community, not just the language on paper. Thank you for your time.
Hey guys, I have a hard cutoff at 7, so I thought maybe I could use 3 minutes to ask some questions. Are you guys able to provide feedback during this?
That would be during the the public hearing, Simon, so.
Okay.
Depending on how long this goes.
Okay, well, maybe I can list off my questions and you guys can take it down if we get feedback. That'd be awesome. First of all, what is an exigent circumstance? Who gets to decide that? And then how is that enforced? For me, it seems a little vague, and there are some things that I would consider exigent circumstances that may not warrant surveillance. Climate change, lack of affordable housing, sick dog. I think that 30 days is far too long to hold people's data. It's in violation of our best practice, and there's no real good reason to keep it for that long except mass data collection and surveillance. So I'd like to know, like, where did that number come from? Is it just because everyone else is doing it? And why are we not looking to do, civil rights best practice of a much shorter time? I think to previous comment, who's going to enforce this? Because is it the cops are going to enforce this to themselves? Last time we had the cameras, we had our civil liberties violated with federal agencies getting our data. And as far as I can tell, the Ferndale Police Department said, oopsies, I promise it won't happen again. And then, nothing really happened. And I don't think that's really acceptable. And then also, what happens if a surveillance report is not submitted? We've tried to get enforcement agencies, or our single enforcement agency, to submit a racial impact assessment for, I think it's going on 3 years. And that hasn't happened. And again, there's no enforcement. So I'd like to maybe understand what, is this a strong suggestion from the city, or to previous comment, does this thing actually have teeth and can actually keep us protected? Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Dan Masolia. I live at 851 Silman. I echo most of what the previous two commenters said, especially my friend Simon's questions. I have another one of my own I would like to add. In regards to the section in the ordinance about civil rights and liberties impacts, assessment identifying with specificity any potential adverse impacts the surveillance technology, if deployed, might have on civil rights and civil liberties, including potential disproportionate racial impacts, and what specific affirmative measures will be implemented to safeguard the public from the potential adverse impacts identified in the section, including explicit prohibitions on use, which, I mean, this section just reads to me as a start. There's not enough, specific, what are we going to do to, make this assessment. And given that previous attempts to evaluate civil rights and liberties impacts of Flock and Axon, and the frankly disappointing way that went about, we were promised that someone from the ACLU would come in, no one ever did. What is actually going to happen here? What does this actually mean? Is just the police going to Google what does the ACLU say, and that's going to be our assessment? This just needs to be fleshed out a lot more. And I repeat all previously stated concerns with ALPR technology. I don't think we've received sufficient assurance that the data collected by these won't be used by federal agencies. I just don't feel safe with any of this, and I don't feel very satisfied with this ordinance. That's all I gotta say. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Angela Lepard, and I live on East Breckenridge, and I figured now was an appropriate time for my comments. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about the process. So I work for an agency that gets state and federal funding, and part of our requirements for anything that we put out to the public is that it has to be readable, understandable, and I just ask for accessibility's sake, when you're putting out information, think about timing, and I understand there's a rush, but maybe there should be a question on why there's a rush. Second, I understand that all of you are really great data people, and you have skill sets that we have seen in you, and I could say that, you know, I voted for all of you at least once, so I've seen a skill set that I trust in you, but you can't unpeople the process, meaning we have to trust you. And if you've seen from the latest election, I don't think you can say that we do. If you see what our experiences have been with the police recently, you can understand why we may not trust you. And so if the last leg of your argument is trust us, that's not going to work. And I hope that in the future, the process is helping understand your process and understanding even when all the mitigation is in place, we still don't trust our current federal government. And for those of us that have family that are Black and brown, that's a pretty serious thing. For those of us who have activists as family or are activists ourselves and who are concerned about our safety, that is data you need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Craig Sahaki. I live at 278 West Webster Street. I'm here tonight to urge the Council to reject this ordinance in its current form and give it some more teeth as discussed previously. I want to be direct. This ordinance does not seem to be oversight. It reads like a permission slip with additional paperwork requirements. And over time, we've seen that this sort of regulation just does not work. For example, in Oakland, California, they passed America's first surveillance oversight ordinance in 2018. And what happened? Public hearings became rubber stamps. Technologies got approved despite opposition, and surveillance overall expanded. The same patterns repeated throughout other cities in the United States, Berkeley, Seattle, Nashville. This sort of oversight doesn't stop the growth of mass surveillance, it documents it. Looking at the specific ordinance, Section 2-192 of this ordinance bans facial recognition, which is good, but it does still authorize license plate readers, social media monitoring, gunshot detection, and drones. Why ban one invasive technology but greenlight the others? License plate readers, they are posed to find stolen cars, help fight crime. It sounds reasonable, but what we see with this, what really happens, every car gets photographed and tracked. Your movements get stored in databases for weeks or maybe up to 30 days in this case. And not just criminals, but everyone. No warrant, no probable cause, just a searchable record of where you've been. 2-198 claims data gets deleted after 30 days, but if you read subsection 1A, it says the data can be kept indefinitely for investigation of a specific crime or a series of related crimes, which is a massive exception. Any investigation can justify keeping this data forever. Section 2-197 allows a 30-day emergency use without approval, renewable indefinitely. Exigent circumstances is vague. Protests can become emergencies. Community events can become security risks. We've seen what happens when flawed technology is trusted blindly. Take Robert Williams from Detroit. Detroit PD arrested him in his driveway in front of his wife and daughters because facial recognition had said that he had stolen watches. He was the 9th best match. This technology was wrong, but he spent 30 hours in jail as a result of it. Go on and on, but for the sake of time, I will just want to make clear that you have the full legal authority under Michigan Home Rule to ban this. No state law prevents it. San Francisco banned facial recognition in 2019. Boston did in 2020. Portland did for government and private use in public spaces. So to sum up, I'm just asking, reject this ordinance in its current state. Don't create an approval framework. Rather, strengthen this to pass a ban ordinance preventing the use of these invasive technologies and make it clear that if a genuine emergency needs arise, we can then revisit this at that time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dia Nuxall. I live at 954 West Marshall Street. I think some of the concerns I had written down were previously addressed, so I won't spend too long on those. One of which is what is an exigent circumstance? Who controls that? How does, I don't think the language exigent circumstance being in there necessarily protects us. Also 30 days as a retention period. It was, I think, previously highlighted in one of our community engagement sessions as one of the parameters in which our flock contract and proposed Axon contract are specifically not in line with the ACLU best practices. The ACLU basically says they recommend as short of a period as possible and gives flocks 30-day retention period as a worst possible example. So I don't think we should be building a surveillance ordinance around what the ACLU specifically says is a bad practice. Not just data sharing. In the case of a hot list or a similar mechanism, who's able to flag suspects? Like, that's a really big question that I don't think is addressed in the ordinance. Where does our hot list come from? The ACLU points out that if flag plates are coming from the NCIC National Database, that does not comply with the US Privacy Act 1974, and suggests that only the hot list can only be controlled internally. But I would ask, even if the hot list is only controlled internally, what due diligence does our PD have to do before adding someone to the hot list? There's a lot of reporting on DHS and CBP going through local police departments to add plates to a hot list. If a federal agency comes to the police department and asks them to add a place for totally not immigration-related reasons, what due diligence does our police department have to do? Or do they just add that? Again, this is not a hypothetical. It's happened in a lot of other states. And then I think lastly, an annual audit is a bare minimum. It still doesn't prevent our data from being shared. This is still, I think, a reactive approach. We're still generating data that we all know may be compromised. And in the case of Flock, it was compromised. And if that happens, we're still going to find out after the fact. So that I would recommend that we don't put ourselves in a position of having to protect dangerous data. I think we just don't collect it.
Any more for call to audience?
Good evening. My name is Prasad Venugopal. I live on 1425 West Troy Street. Lived in Ferndale for over 20 years. Oh, 3 minutes only, huh? We are at the 3-year anniversary of this. I know. That was 5. We are on the
More
3-year anniversary.
opportunity during the public presentation, but go ahead.
That's fine. We're on the 3-year anniversary of this debate on LPRs and mass surveillance. 3 years ago, I created a flyer on behalf of the Ferndale Inclusion Network that was provided to some council members and some members of the PD. I raised a number of concerns about process then. No racial impact assessment of the proposed contract. No review of multi-jurisdictional contracts and agreements. No civil rights, civil liberties, or privacy impact assessments. No expert perspectives on civil liberties and privacy. And little to no transparency on the bidding process. I look at the ordinance that's been submitted. I am actually pleased that we have a detailed piece of legislation that begins to address these complex and important issues. Make no mistake about it, I'm opposed, fully opposed, to mass surveillance. And I think that's what we're discussing here. All those of us who have been opposed to it have named it as mass surveillance. Those who have been in support of it have not used that phrase. But I thank councilpersons Laura and Donnie for their work on this because I believe this actually provides a framework for us to discuss this approach to the use of mass surveillance technologies. Having said this, I believe that this proposed ordinance, while actually critical and might in fact be adopted sometime in the future with a series of significant changes that people have already addressed, should not be brought to a vote next week, and in fact should not be voted on in its current form. It has a number of serious problems, and I'm going to run out of time. I could speak for 45 minutes here on this thing, but I'll give you an example. Cell phones are omitted from the list of surveillance technologies. If you've been paying attention to what's been happening in Minneapolis, ICE agents are using an app called Mobile Fortify to do both facial recognition, which immediately tells them whether the person that they're taking a picture of is a citizen or not, and also Mobile Fortify can take fingerprint data from about 15 feet or so just by taking a picture. So if you raise your hands up because you want to be safe, they'll take your picture and then they can read your fingerprints off of it. You can look it up. You don't have to believe me. And you cannot solve the problem by just reinserting cell phones into the list of devices included in the ordinance because there are serious transparency and oversight issues. 2, there can be no accountability for use when there are no enforcement penalties for abuse. And this ordinance does not incorporate the ability for the public to seek legal redress for violations of the ordinance. Number 3, it does not provide adequate transparency or specificity for the process of generating the technology specification reports. And others have said it does not identify what exigent circumstances. I know I'm out of time, but allow me to say this. It should not be lost upon us that we're trying to legislate government surveillance at a time when the brutality and the tactics of authoritarian fascist government in Washington, D.C. is unleashing its tactics on people of Minneapolis and Detroit and everywhere else. And we're trying to legislate government surveillance in this context. We shouldn't do it. We want to be on the right side of history. We don't want to be on the side that says this surveillance can be used the way it is being used by the administration. So I ask that we reject this ordinance and the Axon contract that underlies it. We will have a chance to return to it in the future when we have a truly strong surveillance ordinance that bans most of the surveillance but allows for its use in very special circumstances that we still need to discuss.
Thank you, Prasad.
Hello, I'm Jonathan. I live on Shevlin Street in Ferndale. This ordinance's statement of intent says that it seeks to protect the privacy, liberty, and safety of the public and make sure that this technology does not unreasonably infringe on a person's privacy or liberty rights. Frankly, I don't see how it's possible to accomplish this goal when the technology in question depends on the mass surveillance of movement from everyone living and passing through our community. The very idea seems to me to be a contradiction of terms. And I'll echo the sentiment of something that a neighbor said in a previous meeting that stuck with me, that it seems like in this conversation, we are starting the conversation with differing terms on what these things mean. Like fundamentally, what does safety mean for Ferndale and its citizens and its neighbors? I think that I've gotten the sense throughout this that my idea of safety is different from some other people's. For me, it does not involve handing over our privacy to a tech company whose only guiding moral is profit and market share. They are not concerned with our safety as much as they like to market it that way. To echo Prasad, we all see what's happening across the country with ICE and Border Patrol. And I don't think it's alarmist to say that the proliferation of mass surveillance and high-tech police weaponry is directly connected to this terrifying rise of fascist violence. I think this is in particular a very scary and bad time to let these things into our neighborhood. So I think I appreciate us having this session. For me, it's hard to nitpick an ordinance that I think, when I fundamentally disagree with the idea that ALPR makes us safer, because I don't think it does. I don't know what to do with that other than to urge you to please vote no and not pass this technology in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rory. I live here in Ferndale. Yeah, so like a lot of the other speakers, I am opposed to this technology in general, but I can also engage with the ordinance that we have here, and also just some general thoughts. But I guess one thing that I haven't heard mentioned yet, but there is actual, like, connection between, you know, ICE and DHS and companies like Axon that profit from, you know, policing in this country. So, for example, I think like a day ago there was reporting about how Axon's stock rose by like a pretty significant amount once they announced that they were gonna roll out body cameras to you know, like ICE and cops in general in Minneapolis. So it's like they make their money on, I don't know, it's kind of like security theater or maybe like protection theater, you know? It's like we've created a problem and then we're gonna make money on the solution, which is these technologies that provide oversight, but, you know, without getting into that whole debate, just like, you know, Axon makes their money from over policing, and yeah. Anyway, so on to the ordinance. So one thing that kind of stuck in my craw a bit is it's point 4 on page 5, section 2, 193. Okay, so City Council shall only approve a procurement request, yada yada. Okay, so if it determines that the benefits of the surveillance technology outweigh its costs. So that's one thing, is like, I would really like to see a very clear like cost benefit analysis, because as far as like what has been prevented from the city / police department, it's like all benefits, the costs are only being represented by the community, and I feel like are often being like underplayed, or, you know, it's like we're trying to hold, you know, police and you all on city council and, you know, like hold you guys accountable, and then we're accused of like bullying and stuff. So it's like, it's hard to believe that there is like a good faith cost benefit happening here. The other part is later on we talk about surveillance technology will not be based upon discriminatory factors or designed to have a disparate impact on any community. So that's like real like weasel language, where it's like, oh, well, we didn't mean to discriminate, we didn't intend to, which is why you need that that like racial impact assessment that apparently we're all you know, delinquent on. So it's like, to me, that has to happen first before you can even say at all that, like, you know, there's even been an attempt to actually stand by that statement. So yeah, thanks.
And I just want to state before you start, so before we start her time, that you will have also opportunity to speak again for a longer period of time during the public presentation as well, just so you know.
Hi, I'm Savannah Camplin. I live on 2147 Shevlin Street. I, unlike my fellow community members, did not prepare anything and am not good at speaking off the cuff, so I'll keep it short and just reiterate that I just don't feel positive about any ALPRs for all of the reasons they've mentioned, and I think especially from what we've seen in the last few weeks, that we should all feel even more nervous about them, and it has proven some of the things that made us hesitant in the first place have come to fruition, unfortunately. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind, and I would ask you to vote no on this ordinance and reconsider the use of ALPRs altogether. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Mike Williams from 9 Mile Road. Join the club. There's at least one more person in the club that did not prepare. I literally just rolled back into town and was like, oh no, it's 6 p.m., not 7. So here we are. But that being said, first off, I'd like to just say that how we treat ALPR is going to set the tone for the future battles that we don't even know yet, like surveillance drones and like patrol things and like, you know, like do we get tickets from the air and you know, like, but we don't even know what those things are going to be yet. But this decision today, this like how we set the tone for all this today is going to be the framework that we have to decide all those other things in, right? So it's really important that we get it super right if this is going to be the vocabulary that we use to speak about these unknown things in the future that we don't know, right? So it's really important that we drill down on like, you know, well, I guess first off, I'm opposed to all the surveillance tech, right? I think I've been pretty vocal about that in the past. I don't need to. I got here late. I don't know what my neighbors have said, but there's some pretty intelligent and passionate voices in the room. I don't need to reiterate all the stuff that I'm sure they already covered, but there's a few really important things. Like, first off, there's some requirements like what happens when all these audits or reports are ignored or late? Like we keep turning around this racial impact assessment, right? And there's like these requirements for reporting and auditing, but there is no actual penalty mechanism whatsoever in any of this for like, well, what happens when the police chief stands here and says, well, how can we do a racial report on technology? How the technology doesn't see race? Like we heard in another thing about this race, you know, like what happens when like somebody digs in their heels and says, well, I'm not doing that. Do we turn off the technology and not give more access to that technology? Do we continue to pay for it? Do we break the contract? It's a really complex situation that I could see happening like in the next 6 months. Right. So next, if all our neighboring cities have this tech, do we really need it anyway? Like, we're only 4 square miles. I just want to like put that out there. Like, should we be looking at how to use tech in our 4 square miles that maybe piggybacks on top of the things that our neighbors already have, like our neighboring cities already have? Like Royal Oak has how many, you know, ALPR cameras? Every single entrance to the city is covered on the other side of those entrances to the city by ALPR cameras and by tech, right? So like, do we really need to be paying for that and regulating that and deciding those kind of things in our community? Or should we be looking at how to like come up with ways to like use what's already around us? And like, I still have it. I keep asking about this, but like, do we know what the like general crime solve rate of Ferndale PD was before and after any of this, you know, before the ALPR camera? Like, did we suddenly start solving 10% more crimes because we have surveillance records on everyone? Or did we suddenly solve 5 more crimes? Because I've heard like 5 to 8 examples over the course of years of what has happened. So like, I think that before we write or finalize an ordinance about this tech, we still need to answer those underlying questions. We also have not heard how many interactions our police officers have had with the public that were off of bad data from this tech. I keep hearing that I can file a FOIA request and that they'll give me a quote to tell me how many hundreds of dollars it would be because it's such a hard answer to question to answer, which tells me 2 things. 1, it does happen. It has happened. Otherwise, the answer would be 0. We'd know that. And 2, it's happened more than a handful of times or we'd know right away.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments before I close? Okay, all right.
Hi, I'm Electra Petrucci. I've lived in Ferndale for 10 years. I live on 9 Mile. I am on the record previously as being opposed to any surveillance of this kind in our city, but I am actually going to nitpick this document, which I didn't think I would do. But under the civil rights and liberties impacts, one of my questions, in addition to all the questions that were also verbalized by the other folks here, It's the first section. It talks about any potential adverse impacts the surveillance technology, if deployed, might have on civil rights and civil liberties, including potential disproportionate racial impacts. Who is deciding that? Like, who is the oversight on those potential impacts? Is it going to be a white man? Are they going to be deciding what that is? Will there be a lot of people representing all different kinds of people? Will it be one person? Will it be the police chief? So I have a lot of questions, and the wording is, to use a fantastic quote, weaselly language, I believe, weasel language. It just seems like it leaves a lot of room for interpretation and opacity for something that's really important. So thank you.
All right. So I'm closing call to audience at 6:44 PM. And now we are moving on to the public hearing. But first, I believe that I'd like for the city manager to kind of give an overview before I open it up.
All right, thank you, council and members of the community, for joining us on this discussion tonight. I will provide a quick update on what's contained in the ordinance, but appreciate that it sounds like a lot of folks did their homework already and actually reading through it tonight, so that's very helpful. The background, why we're establishing or looking to establish this policy, is really about formal procedures for the consideration of future public surveillance technology. A model was taken from the city of Detroit to build this first draft of an ordinance, and the draft ordinance is currently open for public comment, both through this and a public comment period, which is open through noon on Monday, February 9th. What was the goal in establishing this ordinance? Balancing individual civil liberties with the operational needs of the organization by regulating the procurement of surveillance technology, ensuring transparency and oversight for the use of subsequently approved surveillance technology, and then providing a framework for reporting on the use of that. Some key considerations that went into the ordinance, and this is really just a really rough outline of what's already contained in the ordinance, but it outlines the forms of technology that constitute surveillance, what does and doesn't meet the threshold for that consideration. It applies conditions for procurement and use, specifically by us as a city. It defines parameters for information that must be considered as part of that surveillance technology, so that surveillance technology specification report, the details that are required of it. And then it requires annual reporting, both the annual surveillance technology procurement report, the annual surveillance technology use report, and as soon as practical, written reports on exigent circumstance use. It also establishes limits on data retention, access, and sharing, and expressly prohibits certain types of technology and certain contracts. The bulk of this regarding the framework for reporting, the annual surveillance technology procurement report has to do with all of the private vendors that are used to provide surveillance technology services. It includes the cost, the sources of funding, and contract details on an annual basis. And then the surveillance technology use report, which is also due annually, summarizes errors or misreads, internal and external access, internal audit results, including violations, reported misuse, complaints or concerns received, and relevant internal policies and directives that are used to guide the use of that technology. As far as next steps in this discussion, as I mentioned, we have a public comment period open now. This is the public hearing period this evening. And then we will have a second reading where a copy of the ordinance with recommended changes will be considered on February 9th. If council elects to do so, we have considered our alternative rules for public hearing. So during this public hearing period, if adopted, that limit would be increased to 5 minutes per person, and the comments may include questions directed at the city council body. I will note it's still to the discretion of the individual members whether they choose to respond in whole or in part, and that does count towards the 5-minute time limit, so be mindful of your responses because council will have their own discussion period to follow the public comment. As with our normal rules of procedure, questions and comments should be directed to the council body, not single out individual members. The speakers must come to the podium to speak. Calls from the audience are considered disorderly speech, and also we can't pick them up on our audio, so we don't have a good transcript for meeting purposes. And then comments are limited to the topic of the public hearing. So in this particular instance, the comments would be limited to the ordinance itself. The time period for comments, which we've just experienced, was the call to audience that was appropriate for all other comments. And then again, same rules for disorderly conduct. Any threatening language or breaches of peace would not be tolerated. So we do ask normal rules to be followed for that. Certainly, if there's any questions from council on that, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I would defer to you all whether you wish to adopt those alternative rules and open the public comment period.
Madam Mayor, I move we suspend our normal rules of procedure and use the alternate public hearing rules of procedure as proposed.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. With that being said, we need a motion to open up the public procedure at 6:49 PM.
Madam Mayor, I move we open the public hearing at 6:49 PM.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The procedure, the public hearing is open to the audience in relation to this ordinance at 6:49. You have 5 minutes at the podium, so you may come up and state. Your concerns regarding it or support.
I'm back. Same questions. My name is Simon Cohen. I live on Marshall Street. Hello again. What is an exigent circumstance?
Madam Mayor, I can make an attempt to answer most of Simon's questions since I drafted the ordinance. So an exigent circumstance is typically something where there's an imminent threat to life or property, so a fire, hostage situation, the sorts of things where typically the technology used in those are things like through-the-wall FLIR cameras, particularly in structure fires or hostage situations where you're looking to see where someone is. We don't own that technology, so we would be asking someone like Royal Oak to come in with theirs, and that would technically constitute a use on our part because it would be happening within our borders, and we would be asking for that to be done on our behalf. So typically, there are actions or technologies taken in those kinds of circumstances.
Yeah.
A public protest would not rise to that level under any definition of the law unless it became violent, at which case any normal policing
Defined
activity.
by who?
Well, I think usually, no.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm very sorry. I think we're on the same page with that. But I think what we've seen in many instances is protests being declared an unlawful assembly when the cops deem it necessary rather than when like rational individuals deem it necessary. And I think particularly in the case of noise demonstrations against ICE.
Sure.
And that rapidly escalates to LRADs, pepper spray, crowd control, and I think that who gets to decide what an exigent circumstance is really important. And I would also like to say that from the way that you put it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I think a 30-day retention period on ALPR data would not help in a hostage situation.
Correct.
When you need like a heat camera.
Right. So in that case, you're really not retaining any data because that technology is not really a primary generator of actionable data other than on-site real-time use of the data.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at with, the 30-day retention is usually going to be something like ALPR. One of your questions was why this number? A number of folks have asked that question. It is generally the best practice for state of Michigan investigatory work. The state typically encourages jurisdictions to retain data for 30 days because it takes a lot longer sometimes to get the prosecutors to take the action they need to take in certain cases. And so we want to make sure the data is, still available when prosecution begins for crime. So it's typically, 30 days is fairly typical under the sort of state-advised investigatory procedures. I don't, as an individual member of this council, I don't have a particularly strong stake in it, other than making sure that we don't set a time limit that does put us in a position where someone does burgle a home and is caught, and then we don't have the data that would have been needed to convict.
Yeah, sorry, we got a minute and a half left. Can we go back to who gets to decide what an exigent circumstance is?
It's the city government. It's always the city government that has to define that in any jurisdiction.
But in an exigent circumstance, who gets to decide this is it? Like, do you guys convene a council meeting?
It would be the relevant responsible chief. So the
it'd be-
fire chief or the police chief,
It would be the police chief.
or the fire chief, yes.
Yeah, but you guys say in here that for fire use, it's fine, which is, I think nobody's arguing with. But in the case of police, an exigent circumstance would be determined by the chief of police at his discretion.
I mean, subject to discussion, I'm sure, with the city manager, who is the police
Subject
chief's
to
boss.
discussion with the city manager, or not. I really want to get clarification on, I think you and I agree on what an exigent circumstance is. I think the chief of police may have a different perspective on it, and I don't think I share it, and I want my perspective enshrined, and I think my neighbors may share a similar perspective. So I think that's one of the big holes for me, is hey, the police gets to decide when they get to use their fun toys because it's an emergency. And I think that's I don't know, scares the shit out of me. Sorry, I don't think I can curse. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
So through the chair, just as a matter of course, this was something that I also struggled with. Would it be helpful to change some of the language so that we make it a little bit more specific, instead of just saying an exigent circumstance? Have language in there that says an exigent circumstance means a situation involving an imminent threat to life or public safety that requires immediate action, number one, as a definition. And then I too struggle with who determines it and how they determine it and how we know. We could have something in there about determination of exigency must be made by the chief of police or a designee and documented in writing within 48 hours. These determinations shall be reviewed by some sort of oversight board, I don't know if that would be a council, CPARB maybe?
The only caution I would have, Councilmember, is that we want to be careful when again, I'm going to fall back to my sort of egg-headedness on this stuff. When you're drafting an ordinance, we want to be careful that we're not drafting an ordinance that is so granular that it is dictating the day-to-day or moment-to-moment actions of city staff. That's just not good legislative practice, because there have to be judgment calls made by the folks that are put in the positions of trust to the public. If, say, the chief made the wrong call and declared something an exigent circumstance, the chief would stand to lose his job, just like anybody else who would have done that. So, I mean, the accountability, again, there's always a desire for us to legislate that something will definitively happen to someone, but we know we can't do that. We know we can't do that. That is just not a thing that we can do. We cannot preset the outcome of specific things too far in advance. It's just not legally permissible.
With the language that I proposed, are we doing that?
No, the language you propose is, I don't see any reason why there would be a problem with that.
Okay. So if,
But I will note the ordinance does say use solely to respond to exigent circumstances that present an immediate threat to public welfare, health, and safety. I mean, the language is there.
I guess maybe we just need to be more specific. Like, these are immediate threats to life. Like, it's a hostage situation. It's a kidnapping. You know, it's something like that instead of, I don't know. Again, you know that I struggled with this, and I don't like things that are a little bit loosey-goosey, and this feels a little loosey-goosey.
Sure. I mean, we can put definitions in of the sort of, what are the most common typical sort of things? Structure fire, kidnapping, hostage situation, active shooter. I mean, those are kind of the typical, I think the ones that occur the most commonly unfortunately.
So I guess I'd like to hear, and I can ask the chief this later, but through the city manager, who would be enforcing it, just so we can get that question answered? Would it be through, just so we can have something?
Yeah, so in exigent circumstances would be determined in real time by the command officer on scene. I will note an exigent circumstance ends the moment that our officers get a warrant or some sort of judicial order. I mean, it doesn't end, but in the context of this ordinance, it really does, because we allow actions of surveillance when there is a duly authorized warrant associated with it. So exigent circumstances is a very narrow window of time.
All right, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Mike again, 9 Mile. I hope I'm not, do we get, by the way, it wasn't really clear about the format because we're doing a weird format. Is this the only 5 minutes I get to speak if nobody else wants a turn and there's another time available? Do I get another 5 minutes later if we have another subject, or is this like, is this my only go?
This is your 5 minutes for this subject, and there's
Okay,
no
okay,
other
great,
subject
great.
tonight.
All right, so good. So first off, like, I just want to skip back to, like, before I get back to supporting my neighbor here, like all of these reporting and auditing and stuff, once again, there's no penalty mechanism, but there's also no specific language about who specifically makes sure any of that happens. Whose job is it to make sure those things are done specifically? And what authority do they have to make sure that that reporting and those audits and that the summaries of when surveillance is used, all that's like, who's in charge of all of that specifically? And should that be in the ordinance that it's that person's job so that it's not like unclear about who manages that? Second off is, like, I want to go back to this exigent circumstances because this is a really great point I completely even missed. Like, we're putting a cat in charge of when it's okay to decide to eat the mice. Right, like, for real, like, we need to separate very specifically as a community the discussions about fire exigent circumstances and EMS exigent circumstances and police and crowd control exigent circumstances, because we can't hide behind pieces of one to talk about another. They're very different, and we all know they're very different, right? So, like, does the police chief get to decide based on any criteria he wants? Is there a list of criteria he needs to use? How often are exigent circumstances? Like, is this something that, like, it's a big deal in our community, and, like, the council is going to know, and the mayor is going to know, and the public's going to know, like, there's a hostage situation going on. Is there something like, in order to declare exigent circumstances, should some part of council be required, or, you know, in that decision? Is it that big of a deal, or is this something that's really commonplace? Because in that case, I'm even more concerned, right? And also, like, can the chief, like, make a call about exigent circumstances that the council outright disagrees with? Whose authority is it? Is it just the chief's authority, or does the council have the authority to override the chief in that circumstance? You know, we're talking about, like, a demonstration. Like, I think what I'm concerned about, and what some of my neighbors are concerned about, is, like, for instance, a demonstration at 9 and Woodward that is following all of the laws, and then suddenly there's like tear gas or arrests or like a line getting pushed forward at people, and we're getting told we're being aggressive. Like all of these tactics get used, and we're all concerned that like because it's inconvenient, someone, and I don't mean Chief Emmy, I mean public figure X, because we have to separate this also from the personalities involved and say like, well, we can trust Chief Emmy not to make a bad decision. Well, what happens if Chief Emmy has a stroke, heaven forbid? What happens if something terrible happens to Chief Emmy tomorrow and he's not Chief Emmy tomorrow and we have a new chief, right? And then what happens if that guy gets in a car accident or girl or person gets in a car accident a week later and we have another chief that nobody knows what happened in the future, right? Right, and now we have to trust that person to be able to make these emergency calls. And what I've seen for this entire year is the damage emergency calls can make, right? Everything is an emergency right now. Everything is like, as long as there's like a plausible deniability, oop, that's an emergency, and all the rules go out the window, and there is no mechanism in any of this language for how to override that, for how to stop it, or for what penalties there are for abusing it. I just don't see any of that in there. And by the way, when the chief makes a bad call, people's lives, and sometimes hundreds or thousands of people's lives, get changed forever. So it's different than like just a bad call, right? It's like a really heavy weight to those things, right? I have a lot of questions all of a sudden about that I didn't even realize existed about like how this gets activated. Why is the person in charge of doing the thing also the guy in charge of deciding when he gets to do the thing? That makes no sense to me. There's like can you guys even override it? Is there language for you to override it? What happens if you guys are like, whoa, that's bad, we don't want that? Can you stop him or her or whoever's in charge? I guess I'll yield the rest of my time because that's enough. Thanks.
I can answer. So it is the city manager's responsibility to ensure that all ordinances are executed as they are written and adopted by the council. So it is the city manager's responsibility. So we are a council manager government. I think we all know that. But that means that there are some incredibly important things to be said about that. This council cannot override the decisions of directors. No. This council cannot override the direction of the police chief. That is not the role of a council in a council manager structure. The manager is the chief executive officer of the government. She runs the government day to day. The chief is responsible to her. If we don't like a call the chief made, we can have a conversation with the city manager about how we don't appreciate that was done. But in a circumstance, this council would not be able to convene and then vote. That's not a thing that can happen because we are not that kind of government. Right? We're not a full-time body. And so we have jobs. We are, this is what we do in the evenings and the weekends and the free time we have in our days. And so that's why we can't do that, because we cannot have that day-to-day constant work. That's the role of the city manager. So we oversee the city manager, and then she oversees the rest of the government. And so she's accountable to us. So if the wrong calls are made, it falls at her feet. And it's her responsibility to come to us and explain what happened, why it happened, and she knows that that can also be consequential to her employment terms with the city if things are not going the way we want. I think a good question was emergency calls. I think I want to make sure we don't get too far down the rabbit hole on this because they don't happen that often. We don't have that many incidents like that in Ferndale. We don't have them very often. We had a structure fire last week. So that would be a circumstance where, yeah, a home was burning, it was a very large fire, and activities need to happen. It would not be prudent for me and this council, I think, to try to guess whether the right calls are being made on the scene of a fire. That's just not what we can do. So the whole purpose of a lot of this is we can't legislate absolute perfection, and we cannot legislate the right calls being made every day, right? We can set the guidelines and our expectations. You all can set your expectations on us as a council, on the city government as a whole, and then we all do our best to uphold them, knowing that this is a government composed of human beings doing their very best for the good of Ferndale. And that's just what we're trying to do. So when we talk about emergency calls can lead to great damage, that's absolutely right. 100% true. Nevertheless, emergency calls have to get made all the time. not just in government, but in our lives, in, in private sectors. I mean, emergency calls happen. And so I'm open to adding really any, number of additional things to the definition, I think, to help flesh this out a bit.
Through the chair, I think, Michael, you said something that was really smart, putting parameters out there for what an exigent circumstance is. I mean, we're just talking about what's a list of exigent circumstances, but if we could set the conditions, like baseline conditions for what an exigent circumstance is, like it only exists when there's immediacy and the situation involves an immediate and time-sensitive threat such that delay would result in loss of life or serious bodily harm, like as one point. Necessity, use of the technology is needed to address the threat. No less intrusive alternative is reasonably available, something like that. So maybe that's something that on our ordinance committee we can work on in terms of just putting those parameters out there, and then also include a list of qualifying exigent scenarios like active shooter, kidnapping in progress, hostage situation, missing child, yada, yada. I do like the idea of fire and police with different parameters around it because there's different things happening there. They're not addressing missing child or kidnapping in progress. So something like that could be helpful as well.
I also think that to some of the concerns that I heard, there also would be some sort of, I guess, chain of command for police and fire also listed in the ordinance as to who to report. I think that should be listed as well for specifics. But anyway, I'm opening it up to the public comment to the audience, so please, if you have comments based on what you've heard already or something new, please come up and utilize your 5 minutes. But just know, again, if it's back and forth conversation, that takes away your 5 minutes. So if you want to say what you want to say, and then maybe we jot down the questions or maybe the answers. So that's up to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Prasad Venugopal, 1425 West Troy Street. I just want to raise a question about where the ordinance came from. I mean, I really appreciate this ordinance. I understand there's a fundamental contradiction that we're all facing, that surveillance technologies are ubiquitous in the world around us, and if we don't legislate something about them, that they might actually happen unlegislated, and that has actually been going on. And therefore, we're stuck with this idea that we need to legislate it, but then we don't want to legislate into existence a number of things that are very problematic that people have talked about just by legislating it. But I want to go to the idea that we started with the CIOGS Ordinance from Detroit. But pardon me for being a little prickly here about this. We said we were trying to follow ACLU guidelines on a number of things. We never brought the ACLU in to actually have a conversation about it. But we kept insisting we were doing ACLU guidelines. Why did we not start with the CCOPS bill from the ACLU? Community control over police surveillance instead of community input over government surveillance. The one significant difference is an entire section on penalties for abuse and violations of this ordinance. I think it's absolutely critical that we have those penalties in. We allow serious penalties for people who abuse it. You know, somebody says the police chief's going to get fired. Well, nobody here believes that. Someone else is going to get fired. Nobody here believes that unless it's actually written in. And you know why we don't believe it, because there's a police union contract that most of us have not read that talks about how this should be dealt with. Are we going to put that police union contract up for everybody to look at and see how it conflicts with this ordinance in terms of penalties? I'm not sure we're going to do it. I would ask the city manager to release that contract so that we can have a discussion about the police union contract itself in relation to the ordinance penalties.
I will note all union contracts are available publicly on the city's
Fair enough.
website.
I agree with that. I didn't mean to say it exactly that way, but I think we should debate that police union contract in relation to this. Now, one of the things is 30 days. That's not an ACLU best practice. The ACLU best practice is actually more like 72 hours or 48 hours or so, leading up to 14 days in certain circumstances. There is actually no legislative, no law enforcement, or no other other than some arbitrarily determined standard that none of us really have an idea where it came from that says the data should be held for 30 days. Actually, when you think about a license plate reader, it takes about 2 to 3 minutes, including all Wi-Fi back and forthing, to figure out if somebody's on a hot list. And if it isn't, that data could be deleted in the matter of 2 or 3 minutes if your name is not on a hot list. The idea we would keep it for 30 days is an unexamined idea that I questioned of the flock representatives when they were here. About those exigent circumstances, it's not just the question of what should and should not be in the list. I think it's very important to include a process that involves more than one individual. It is a process that can work in the matter of minutes, seconds, hours, whatever the case might be, that involves significantly more oversight than the idea that one person can make a decision about whether a circumstance is exigent or not. And I give you the example of what happened to Alex Preddy. That was exigent circumstances. Somebody shouts gun, someone else grabs the gun of did I get his name wrong? Okay. Somebody else grabs the gun off, but someone else, 2 other ICE agents, shoot him 10 or 11 times. They argued that they had exigent circumstances. They argued the same thing for Rene Good. These are individuals making these decisions. There actually has to be more. It would have been okay to let Rene live. It would have been okay to let Alex live while they were trying to determine what the exigent circumstances relating to that gun was. It is exigent circumstances that have, unless there's proper and more process and oversight with more people involved, that can cause the greatest damage. I fully understand the issue of fire and other emergencies, abductions, and so on. Get more people involved in that process, you actually have a stronger set of circumstances. Penalties. Without penalties, this ordinance has no teeth. This ordinance also does not talk about future tech. I Googled the word future in this. It's not in that ordinance at all. I mean, not Googled, I did a search for it. We really need to have some language about future technologies and how we will approach them, because the speed of technological change far outweighs legislative speed. And finally, I will say about this. We're going to come back to this question. With all the comments that have been made and the comments that council has made, I think it should be pretty clear to us, we are not in a position in a week or even 2 weeks or more to finish discussing the very serious issues behind this. Therefore, I believe that this ordinance should not be voted on next week, and I believe that that Axon contract that's sitting behind it should not be voted on. It should be voted down. It will not eliminate the possibility that one of these contracts might be up for discussion later, but for right now, we are not ready, and the dangers out there of legislating this without thinking too much about it is out there in the world for us to see.
Thank you. I can? Okay, all right.
Did you want me to?
We wanted to answer some questions before.
Yeah, that's fine, sure.
You wanted me to talk about where it,
Origin.
oh, so the question, Prasad, was where did the ordinance come from? Where does this come from? So I know I'm going to get a lot of boos on this. Believe it or not, had been working on a CIOGS ordinance for a while, because I was part of the effort in Detroit to do it. It was part of the working group internally at the city of Detroit working on the draft of the CIOGS ordinance there a few years ago when Detroit passed its ordinance. And so it had always been on my list as something to do in light of the fact of right before I was elected, the city was, 3 years, we were doing the debate about flock. All that was going on. And so as I was coming into office, I was like, okay, this conversation's happening. We need to do something about this. And so I had started the process of drafting one, it just didn't get off the ground when I wanted it to. And then when we had the issue with flock and the, massive violation of trust and violation of policy, that's when I was like, okay, I got to restart work on this. I used a lot of Detroit's language on this because I was part of that work. And honestly, the ACLU was there for that. They did participate in the drafting of Detroit's ordinance quite extensively. And although they did not like the 30-day rule, they found that it was acceptable on balance with the rest of the ordinance, that the ordinance on balance did a lot of what it wanted Detroit to do. And so I felt like that was reasonable to stick with that timeline. Not I, again, as an individual council member, not wedded to the 30 days, as long as we have a provision that says we have to retain things if legally required. That's just, we can't not do that. I think we all know that. So that's kind of where the ordinance came from. It just was like, it had been sort of languishing in my drafts for a while. And then the flock situation occurred, and I was like, all right, I've got to kind of get this thing moving again, and I had a lot of support to do that. Why we didn't include any penalties for violations, mostly because of the collective bargaining. It's really hard to prescribe penalties in an ordinance for staff that are union. You know, regardless of anyone's feelings about public safety unions, they are union, and they are recognized under state law as a union. And so we cannot impose penalties on them that are not part of their contract. We can always try to negotiate their contract in a way that does meet what we want, but we still have to reach, it's collective bargaining, right? We have to bargain with them on terms, on things. So that's why there weren't specific penalties included for city staff, because of that. I didn't want to have language that could potentially conflict with that. It wasn't there wasn't an intent to leave it out because I didn't want accountability. It's just, I know how these things go with that process. Sorry, that's it. Sorry, Paul.
And I think I heard something that we'll consider regarding, I think there was a question as to whether or not how future technology would be utilized in this ordinance.
Right, it's a good point. It is a good point.
All right.
Paul Collum, East Breckenridge Street. Thank you, everyone, for the work so far. It's been a long process. I guess my questions are, an ordinance is to set up to codify things, whether it's permanently or not. It just seems like some of the things that are written in this ordinance kind of skirt between a statement and a question with not a real answer. So, for example, 2-194K demands for access to surveillance data. It says, what legal standard must be met by government entities or third parties seeking or demanding access to surveillance data? Well, I guess my question is, why isn't that actually listed what the legal standards are that we're going to have? For example, complaints. What procedures will allow members of the public to register complaints or concerns? Well, why aren't those procedures actually in this ordinance? And, you know, there are several spots, you know, like where applicable. It just seems very open-ended and not a lot of shalls and will be's, which I think would kind of strengthen things. So I'm just kind of curious as to how we can strengthen those things. For example, like training. I know we have a union contract and things we can enforce and cannot enforce, but surely we can say, you know, it says, would specialized training be required in connection with the use of surveillance technology? Like, the answer would be yes. You know, I mean, the determination of what that specific training is fluid, but the answer should always be yes. So I guess some of these things here just seem to be very, very open-ended. And if we're going to repeal something, which is what this ordinance does, is repeal a specific ordinance, that if we're going to make it stronger, let's make it stronger. If it's something that is corresponding to another policy or procedure, then that procedure or policy should actually be listed in this ordinance. If you say, okay, the training is, you know, under police manual, whatever, I think that should be specified in this ordinance as to where that is. So, thank you.
So I can address that a little bit, Paul. So what that section is, A through in that section. So those are the things that the surveillance technology specification report has to provide. So it has to say basically these are the requirements of that report. So the report has to say, you know, we want this technology, they have to tell the council what training is required for staff to properly use this technology. Not just the regular day-to-day training, but for that in question. So these are they are kind of framed as questions without a question mark, because it's saying what has to be included in the report. And what has to be included in the report, in this case, in like section M is, what training is required for people to properly operate this technology? What are the training requirements? You know, that would also include something like, is there an annual refresher training required, all that kind of stuff to properly use it. So it's sort of framing these as, these are the things, like what must be specified in each of those sections of the specification report.
And if I may, so, but shouldn't we determine what is the training? Like, if the chief says, okay, we believe this is what the training is, but if we as a collective feel it should be more, then shouldn't we put that in here rather than saying, you know, the chief has to determine that this is the appropriate training, but we feel it is not? So, you know what I mean? It's just kind of.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. And I think what we would need to do is specify between two kind of categories of training, right? So I think we can talk about putting language that requires police to undergo regular sort of general training on things like, which they already do, but, you know, we can be more explicit about things like civil liberties, protection of those things, you know, how to be a good neighborhood type policing model, et cetera, and then training in this case is training on the technology in question. So it'd be basically based on the specs of the technology, what kind of training is required to operate it. You have to learn how to use this system, you have to learn how to do this thing, or, you know, don't push that button ever, or don't look into that hole ever, you'll go blind. Those sorts of trainings, like how to use the thing, is what would be in this report. What I think you're talking about more is a broader concept of training, which is requiring more training for the police department more broadly about the proper use of these things and about respecting and upholding people's rights and liberties, especially in the context of this. There are certainly, I'm sure, trainings with the focus of how to teach law enforcement to be better law enforcement with regard to the use of these things. And that's something I think that would make sense to mandate more of.
Right, and then, like, you know, going back to, for example, the complaint one, like, I think we should be, as a collective, we should be able to determine what the complaint policy procedure is rather than the person that's actually being complained against. So, I mean, I think that is very, very important to this document, how we establish the mechanism for the complaint rather than that department.
Thanks, Paul.
Hi, I'm Rory. You know me, I'm back. I had questions on the annual surveillance technology use report. So that's 196. Okay, so for starters, annual doesn't seem frequent enough for me, especially like if we're adopting a new technology. You can do a lot of damage in a year. I could imagine that being appropriate for something that's like, I mean, again, in my ideal world, we're not going to have ALPRs, but if it's something that, you know, never mind. Annual, can we do something about that? Can we make that a little more frequent? At least, at very minimum, like when adopting a new technology. Feel free to respond during my thing if you want, because I don't have that much to talk about, but.
Yes. I think when I was drafting this, I kind of left this as one of the discussion points that I assumed the council might have. Annual was just sort of the default, because there are often annual reports to the council, but
Okay.
I think there's no reason it couldn't be quarterly. You know, there's no reason it couldn't be. And I also, you know, think that these reports wouldn't just go to the council. I think they're also intended to go to the CPARB. And they, you know, that they should have, you know, a little bit more role in looking at that as well. And, you know, kind of saying like, you know, we've reviewed the use report as well, and we, you know, do not see any particular, you know, nothing egregious, or, you know, it looks like you're trying to pull the wool over our eyes or anything like that.
Yeah. So, and then it's going to be the city manager making this report? Is that
City
right?
manager prepares the report.
Okay. And so I assume that you're going to be largely working with the police department for most of the items A through K here. You know, H talks about internal audits. I guess my question would be, again, to me, internal audit doesn't really cut it. I think you kind of either need to have like a third party or someone explicitly representing, you know, like privacy of the public, basically. And also who's, I don't know, who has the experience and like is able to push back on police department talking points and actually probe a little bit more. So I guess I'm wondering if, I don't know, I would like to see, yeah, I guess, yeah, something explicitly representing, you know, public privacy as like a party in this report. And I guess that also goes into like any misuse of the technology during the reporting period and any actions taken in response. Like, who is evaluating that? Or is that just self-reporting from the police department? Because, again, if you're incentivized to say that everything is good and we're not misusing anything because you want to keep using the technology and not get in trouble, yeah, I guess I'd like to see a little more like skepticism applied and not just taking everyone's word on it. So what do you think about that?
I think that's very good. I think that's very good feedback. So I think a thing to note is in all systems, the city manager is one of the administrative access users. And so in an instance like this, one thing I can assure you about our city manager is she's very thorough. We're a relatively small government, so it's easy for the city manager to be very, very involved and to actually take the time to look into things like that. So I think what I would say is, you know, when the city manager is preparing this report, she is herself she's not going to take a report from the chief and go, well, the chief says all is well, there goes my report. That's really not how the process works. The city manager does her own due diligence and follow up on that because of the nature of what this is. Because this is a system like this. If it was just sort of like the DPW director gave us the plowing success times in the last snowstorm, she probably isn't going to go and query the DPW road crew. In this case, it's a very different type of thing. And in this case, I think there would be a lot more, independent thing. And we could put language that says, like, all of this has to be, validated by the city manager. You brought up an interesting point about a third party doing the audit instead of an internal audit. It's an interesting idea. I don't know what kind of organization does that in terms of like system audits and things like that. If there are some and you know of some or anybody here knows of some that, again, we would trust to have access to our systems because remember, they're going to have some access in order to do their thing. So they would need to be someone we also feel comfortable saying you can come in and be involved. If there's some organization like that, I've never heard of one. It doesn't mean they don't exist. They absolutely might. And so would love to hear about it. Would love to know more about that possibility.
Yeah, I can dig in and report back in a week if I find anything. I know my time's up, but we were doing back and forth. If you can give me just a little grace. Racial impact assessment, I think, should be added to this list. Should be a requirement that it gets done. And we were talking a bit about why we can't put, like, if someone misuses it or does something we don't like, we're going to fire them. And, like, or some, putting that kind of penalty in this. But I think something like, if we're either tardy on the report or find that there's been misuse, being like, okay, well, we've lost our surveillance privileges with this tech until we actually meet these criteria. That seems completely fair to me, so just put that out there. Thanks.
And I'm just going to put out a reminder that the 5 minutes does include the back and forth, so if you want some questions, ask the questions, and then we'll answer the questions afterwards. I don't want you to utilize your time with the back and forth if you have more things to say, so.
I'm taking very thorough notes, so that way I don't forget something.
Okay, all right.
I just had more than a favor because I feel like my neighbors have been very thorough, as I'm sure they have been in reaching out to all of you. I just ask that you think about how meaningful is this ordinance if you can't have something impactful as far as, you know, if somebody misuses it, if they share information incorrectly, if people aren't reporting correctly, if there's nothing that you can do in relation to penalties because of a contract, how meaningful is this? And do you have something to compare it to? I just think of how many people who within their capacity have done wrong, and, you know, one move later, they have another job, or they have a very fulfilled GoFundMe account. And I understand that those things aren't necessarily in our control, but I really want your time to be meaningful, and I want our time to be meaningful. And is this going to be impactful if you can't enforce it because the penalties are just not there? So that was just my question, more so to think about and reflect on as you go forward.
If it would be helpful to council, I'm happy to speak on what is contained in our police union contract in terms of the escalation of violations of city policy. Obviously, as Councilmember Johnson shared, the absence of specific violations in this policy is a reflection of the fact that the work is largely governed by union police force members. But within those contracts, there is progressive discipline. And the city manager's office and the chief are both actively involved, as well as the immediate command staff, for any individuals who violate policy. What we're talking about here would be a violation of an ordinance, which would be an egregious violation of the city's trust and their role. In that regard, whether they have any sort of existing violations of policy or past disciplinary action, it does warrant elevation above just the first step. It's not going to be a written reprimand if there's egregious violations. But we still do have to work within those parameters, and it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you do have, you know, new officers who make missteps. They learn on the job, and it's an appropriate thing to do a written reprimand or a verbal reprimand. If you have more seasoned officers, who will be who's accessing this information, who violate ordinances of the city, then progressive discipline does give us still room to work within a framework that isn't just, you know, a slap on the wrist. So I recognize it's not, you know, union contracts and progressive discipline aren't everybody's world, but there are avenues for us to very strictly enforce these rules and regulations in a way that isn't completely meaningless within the context of the existing contracts that we even do have.
Christopher Hall, Simon Street. I have a few questions. The first one, when was the last racial impact assessment conducted and reviewed? Is it possible to include in the ordinance the creation of a special committee and or board to a representation of the Citizen Police Advisory and Review Board, the Accessibility and Inclusion Committee, and the Ferndale Inclusion Network? 3, for the first 2 years, is it possible to require an audit of the contract conducted to be twice a year and a report to be presented to council for future meetings? And my last one, for the racial impact statements and et cetera, I think we have enough people within the community that we can tap in for it and whatnot. And I think that's key to have that opportunity to have, obviously we have the resources right in this room right now. Another thing that's been kind of irking me during this whole presentation is that, Laura, you were working on this ordinance in tandem with Donnie, correct?
Yes.
Right. All right. I just want to make that clear because it's not, I'm hearing a lot of I statements, and this is a team effort, and this is what people ran on by being in a team. And sorry, that really pisses me off when people try to take credit for something when other people were involved in it. So check, keep your egos at the door and all that. I don't do well with that. So take it for what it is if you want to. But I would like to hear everyone's opinion in regards to all the questions that are being asked, not just one person.
I'm leaving it to you all first, so.
Patrick Schufelt, Pinecrest Drive. I don't really have too many questions. I want to speak generally on the topic. I'm a former public servant, fire and EMS. I am Incident Command System ICS 100 certified, and I have somewhat of an insight to this. And I think, based on the snapping and clapping, I think probably people here are going to agree with me when I say we just don't want this technology in this community. Straight up, like. We know what it is. We know who developed it. We know what it's meant for. It's military-grade surveillance technology, and it has no business in a community. There's not that amount of danger here. There's not that level of threat. It doesn't exist in this community. And to the point about the police unions, we got to give this thing teeth. If you can't discipline, if you can't fire an officer for violating an ordinance, which is their job to enforce your ordinances. If you can't fire them for a single violation, then renegotiate the contract. Like, what are we talking about here? This is ridiculous. And people need to understand the extent of this technology. We're talking about stuff that can catalog rust spots on your vehicle, identify you by the way you walk. And there's a pipeline, there's a data pipeline. We know where it's going. It's going straight to ICE. We know it's going up. And what I want to see, something that's come up in Sterling Heights recently, I want to see the link between the feds and the local police broken, or at least some oversight installed. Like, what is the extent of the link? Where is the data going? And to the exigent circumstances, again, I'm a former public servant. Fire, all fire's ever going to use is a tick and a drone. That's it. A handheld thermal imaging camera, maybe a drone. Some departments have a drone. Do we have a drone on fire here? No? Okay. We had one at Plainfield where I worked. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, fire shouldn't even really barely be in the conversation. Most things they do are reactionary in the moment to protect people. What we're worried about is cataloging of data, the outward flow of the data, and it's simple. We don't want this level of surveillance. Like, it's unnecessary. There's no need for it. And I think that is a general point, is why this ordinance needs to have as many teeth as possible. Like, there needs to be specific penalties. There needs to be repercussions. And moreover, I'd rather see, instead of seeing penalties, I'd rather prevent this technology from ever making it to the street in the first place. Like, I don't even know why we're bothering to have this conversation. There's too much, all of this minutia still adds up to biometric surveillance on our streets. And that's unacceptable. Like, we flatly reject that.
Through the chair, do we have, Colleen, anything about, he asked a question, Patrick, about the link between local police and federal government. Do we have anything that we can share with the?
I got a minute 30 left, let's do it.
Do we have anything we can share with the public? I think there was some conversation about there is no official.
Yeah, the city does not
partnership.
have a partnership with ICE or Border Patrol or Department of Homeland Security.
Right, but the manufacturers of the technology do. And we're talking Flock, which is directly linked to
Yes.
Palantir. We know where the stuff's going.
In the particular instance that the city did elect to move forward with, we have created the system such a way that access is only one way, only granted by the city. So the rules would prohibit open sharing. There has to be a warrant associated with any request.
All right, I would like to see anyone outside of law enforcement. This is, again, we're back at circular. We're back to the police investigating themselves. It's a tale as old as time. We all know how it goes. Like, not just the judge's warrant. I want to see it signed off by any of you guys, at least. You know, like, before, if If they're coming in here and demanding, or public disclosure, if they're coming in here and demanding information, if authorities from above are coming in here and demanding information, the public ought to know about that. At least disclosure, like transparency. That's bare minimum.
Yeah, I think we would face challenges through the judicial system with publicly sharing information about active investigations.
Right. All right.
So, sorry, Colleen, forgive my ignorance on this. Is there some sort of policy or ordinance that states what the relationship currently is, or like the procedure there? Is that something that's?
No, the only existing documented relationships the city has with the federal government have to do with our participation in like the DEA task force, which is just our having an officer available in those instances. We don't have any sort of other underlying statutes governing that.
And where can the public find that? That's in.
The task force memorandums, I'd be happy, anyone who's interested, you can reach out to me, I'll provide a copy.
Thank you.
Through the chair, Patrick brought up a really good point about the outward flow of data. And I wonder if there's opportunity within this ordinance to basically put a ban on the outward flow of data. Can we just simplify it to that extent?
I think the ordinance does go a pretty far way that we only share data where there's a warrant. Where we don't, we could strengthen, I think, the language around that if there's interest from the council body, but my interpretation of the current draft is it's pretty strong regarding restricting access to only things where there is, we're compelled to.
The reason I bring it up is because with what we wrote in the past about ALPRs and the policy language that we had therein, we had information that said that we weren't going to share unless we had a written MOU between another city. And unfortunately, that still happened. So I'm trying to, since an ordinance is going to be significantly stronger than just an internal policy document, I'm trying to give it as much strength as possible. And maybe that's where we tie some of that language about the triggering of progressive penalties, through the union.
Well, and I think in that case, you bring up the point, the violator or the precipitating factor of the violation was the company itself changing policies without appropriate notice, which we did factor into the Axon contract. So there's more protections on that front now than there were in the previous instance. But, I defer to you all. I think legal counsel will ultimately have to weigh in on whatever's proposed regarding if it conflicts with our existing union contracts or presents a.
Yeah. I mean, not to get nitpicky on that, because I don't want to belabor the point, and I see that we have somebody else that wants to speak. But while Flock was obviously a garbage company, and we knew it was a garbage company going into it, and we knew that they did all their data sharing, there was a button that was turned on. And I know that where there is a button that is turned on, somebody turned it on. And I don't know if it was Flock, but something like that, if we can have language in an ordinance that basically says, you cannot violate this. If you do violate this, you can be potentially terminated. You will face the utmost consequences. Something like that would be very helpful. It would inspire a little bit more public trust.
Yeah, like I said, I'm happy to work with you guys all, as I have been on draft language, and we have to, have legal counsel coalesce that with our union contract.
Hi, I'm Savannah again. Dia and I both had the same question. She had to leave, so she asked me if I could ask. It's specifically about the hot list. With ALPR and Flock both have that term, and we're trying to figure out who decides what vehicles go on the hot list, and I'm still not totally clear on if a car is listed on the hot list, even if we're not sharing in the national network, is that car now, if our police determine that someone's on the hot list, are we putting those people at risk when they go into other areas where they don't have national data turned off? So they're put on the hot list in Ferndale, they drive somewhere else, and then they're pulled over and they're on the hot list, and then suddenly their information is on the national database, and it's our, you know, we didn't share it technically, but our police did ultimately make that car a target. So that's really my main question. I'm not expecting someone to have an answer right now, but it's a thing that I've thought about since our first flock meetings. I heard the term hot list and it was thrown around very casually, like, it's a hot list. That's like, we can just trust that it's on the hot list, and that means that they definitely deserve to be on that list. I don't know what the requirements are for being on the hot list. And that also feels kind of weaselly in a way, as we keep going back to not have any sort of, I don't know what makes a car go on the hot list and who gets to decide. And it goes back to that same thing that many people have reiterated, is like, the police are deciding what's on the hot list, and there's not really any oversight to that. So it feels like they could just decide that a car's on a hot list and put that person at risk in many other places, including with federal agencies. So that was really my main question or comment.
I'll just note to that, I don't personally have the procedural information related to that, but if you'd like to send me an email or message, I can make sure we get a response. One other thing, it kind of came up tangentially in your question regarding kind of misreads or when someone's on a hot list that shouldn't be. I did speak with Chief Emmy. Under the Axon system, we would be able to set up an alternative coding tool, something that wasn't available to us under Flock previously, where if an officer in the field discovers an instance where there is a misread, they can actually now create a police report out of it. So we'll be able to actually report out misreads, whereas the previous system did not have that clear of a capacity.
So, Electra Petrucci, West 9 Mile. In terms of the warrant and the data collection, I guess this is more of a kind of philosophical question, but if we don't collect the data, then what would the warrant be collecting? So this really is only a question of like, who do we have to share that with? And now we have a warrant because we have this information that we're collecting, which nobody in this room, as far as I've heard, wants. So that's just to the point in terms of warrants. If the data is not there to have a warrant for, then no one can collect that data. The other thing that seems to keep coming up is that we're really talking around what's happening in Minnesota and people's fears about crowd disbursement and people's fears about ICE coming into our cities. And it seems like we're actually having multiple conversations, like we're talking about ALPRs and we're talking about this ordinance, but we're also trying to write in like how we can control the police controlling crowd dispersal and whether or not they can use tear gas on us and how we can decide and who gets to decide. Does city council meet before they do tear gas on us? We heard you guys don't have the time because you're at your day jobs. So that's just going to be up to someone to decide. And it seems like if that is actually what's on the table, why are we voting on this right now? What is the rush if we're actually talking about major issues that are all over the news that are scaring the heck out of people? And this is a huge conversation that's like, no 12 pages, I don't know. I don't care how well they're written or how long you've been working on them, Donnie and Laura. It doesn't matter. There are too many issues for this. So that's my point.
Hello, Andrea Popovich again, 1445. I don't have necessarily questions anymore. It's more of some statements, some personal, some just as I'm listening to you guys all talk. Changing policies. We don't really own the technology. I work in IT. Things change as they change, and then we hear about it. So I think just writing something on paper that we sign and the Axon signs doesn't really, can mean something for us, but doesn't necessarily mean much for them, as they can change things however they want. I live here because of the community, regardless of where you sit on this. I live because of you here, I live because of these people here. I don't live here because of the police. I don't live here because of the fire department. I mean, thanks to the fire department, huge kudos for the past fire that they were involved, all of the good jazz. But I don't live here because of those services. I live here because of the community that we have here and around us as well. I come from a country that is no more, okay? I'm a refugee all my life. Once you leave home, even if you go back, that's not home anymore. And I want to mention that nobody announced a civil war. There was never a bell that rang. Things just started to happen in different cities, in different blocks. People started to protest. Things just started to happen to those people. So what I think we're all asking is to slow down on the technology as far as surveillance goes. When it goes out to the cloud, it goes out to the cloud. It's not yours. We've seen Flock not even lock down their cameras, and people are watching kids play on the playground. Like, what are we doing? So again, and I'll leave you with this. When things just start to happen, people get taken off the streets, people disappear, people go to camps, whatever we want to call them. Life still goes on. Mortgages still have to be paid. Rent still has to be paid. We have to buy groceries. We still have to meet. Kids still go to school. Life continues for some people, not for all. So I just want to mention some of this when we talk about government surveillance. And I'm asking you to think about government surveillance under this government, not just, if you would have asked me 5 years ago about ALPRs, I would have said, like, yeah, makes sense. It's a good system. But as we currently stand in our government, and as we have seen in Minnesota, in Portland, in LA, it seems to just be spreading, and we seem to be getting numb to things, and we shouldn't be getting numb to things. So I don't have necessarily questions. I appreciate you guys what you did. I think this is a good start, and I think it would be great if we weren't living in the current situation that we live in. Thank you all for your time.
Hi, it's Dan again. We've had some questions and some answers about consequences for police misconduct or misuse, and I'm not satisfied with the answers that I've heard so far. First, we heard that there's not really anything we can add because of their police union their contract. Then we heard that there are some avenues we can pursue if that there is some misconduct. But what I really am missing here is any will that those avenues will even be explored. Because we've been hearing about how the police have been skipping on this racial assessment for years now, and nothing's come of it. We have a reason to pursue some kind of consequence for them, but it hasn't happened. So what I'm saying now is either they need to do that assessment now, or there needs to be some consequences for their actions. Because if there aren't, then there are no consequences for their actions at all. And if there are no consequences for their actions at all, that means that this ordinance is totally toothless and this conversation we're having is totally meaningless.
Dave Cottrell from Beaufield Street, continuing on his, made a good inroad for what I've been thinking about and stewing on. But, you know, if you have a FOIA request and it gets mostly redacted, and so by 30 days, the evidence, like such as body cams disappear, they just stalled and they erased evidence. I don't think it's any consequences of this Ferndale Police Department. If you go to the Citizens Police Review Advisory Board, it's not effective in keeping the police department in check at all. They refuse to recognize complaints. My hands raised to the ceiling. They refuse to acknowledge it. We want to correct them on things that they get wrong, very wrong, and assumptions that they made from the presumption of being former police officers that, oh, this must be so. No, you're wrong, completely wrong on that issue. There's no repercussions for not wearing a body cam. I have some evidence that I've documented, but, you know, they don't have to wear a body cam. There's no follow-through on lying witnesses. The witness lied. There's no stories. They'll believe a story that's not believable at all. Cow jumped over the moon. Must be true. Let's go arrest that guy. And I did file my complaint, so, you know, I just had the police assurances that he would talk to one of the police officers regarding taking down notes about certain important things like health and physical ailments. Just a store clerk would have been fired if he didn't take those notes down. And just basic interviewing of witnesses, like if you tell them some goddamn story that doesn't make any sense at all, and you say, oh, I hit them like this and this, and the woman and their friends is just still standing up and saying, you guys are nuts, this was nothing, that didn't happen, not believe, you don't have to believe, you don't have to believe a wife, because, you know, just believe any guy who creates a story. So there's no penalties on this police department. They can just do whatever they want. And it just goes happens. We can't enforce it. It's a union contract. They're worthless. I hate them. Go to hell. I'll make sure they do.
What is the procedure with double?
There's, no, there's only a single comment period, so.
All right. We're going to leave it open to others first, Michael, before council has their discussion. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All right. And I think that we are going to close, and we need a motion to close public comment at 8:01 and open it up for council discussion.
Move to close public comment at 8:01.
Support.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. So I will start. We heard a lot of concerns regarding the specificity, I can't talk tonight, you know what I mean, regarding this ordinance. Some questions that need to be answered, such as, again, how the technology will be approached in the future and how long the data will be these are things that are permissible by council discussion, but how long the data will be kept, chain of command, who calls the shots, penalties. Anyone can jump in. I mean, I have so much here, but I know we've heard it. Timeliness of the auditing, legal protections. It's a lot of discussion, a lot of concerns. So I've heard them. I see that a lot of that's not in this ordinance right now, so needs to be put in the ordinance. So clearly there needs to be some more vetting of it, but I'd like to hear anyone else who'd like to speak or who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet regarding your thoughts on this. Because it sounds like there's more work to do.
Yeah, through the chair, I appreciate this process, appreciate everyone taking the time to come out and engage. I think this is very important. I had all of these questions and then a few others. I was hoping to get them to my colleagues prior to Monday, but some questions that came up that I wasn't able to prepare, that came up during this meeting, some additional concerns like, I think, Colleen, you mentioned that there's new programming available in this Axon product. And my concern, and this relates to the data audits as well, is we just lack the tech expertise to properly vet new programming, data retention and sharing, and then who does the data, so who does these data audits? I think, I don't even know which questions to ask when it comes to data and data, right? So we need the third party. We don't know who those companies are, but we need to find out, would be my suggestion. I like the idea of community control over input. I think that ties into maybe a need to audit the CPARB organization. I think there's a lot of community questions about that body and how it operates. I think ultimately people on both sides didn't like the process of the flock, then Axon, and now the implementation of this ordinance. So those for and against ALPR cameras. So I wish that we would just start over. And I'd ask my colleagues that we take a look at that as a process next meeting. I prepared a few things about this because it's a very serious topic. Cicero wrote, "The foundation of justice is good faith." I take that to mean something very simple. A healthy society is built on trust, not on suspicion. When we design systems that assume everyone must be monitored just in case, we're already moving away from that kind of good faith that makes a community strong in the first place. Cicero also gave us the line, "The safety of the people shall be the highest law." That phrase is often used to justify surveillance and emergency powers. But Cicero himself warned that when safety is allowed to replace justice, it becomes a pretext for tyranny. When safety becomes whatever those in power say it is, the law no longer protects the people, it protects the system. He went even further when he said, "Laws are silent in times of war." This is not praise, it's a warning. It's a recognition that when we govern through fear and emergency, law and liberty are always the first casualties. And finally, Cicero reminds us that liberty is not having a just master, but having no master. In other words, freedom is not only threatened by bad rulers, it's threatened by too much domination, even when it comes from well-intentioned people using well-intentioned tools. Taken together, Cicero's warning is clear. A state that governs by fear, suspicion, and force may command obedience, but it will never command loyalty. And I worry that large-scale, privately operated surveillance systems move us closer to obedience through monitoring and further away from trust through consent. I know the response. I want to be clear. I support public safety. I support transparency. I support limits, audits, and guardrails. I think that the work that Councilmember Johnson and Mikulski are doing is incredibly important. And we need a good CIOGS ordinance in place, and they've got a framework for something that can and I believe will be very strong. But ordinance governs behavior. It does not change the nature of the tool itself. It does not eliminate the fact that we are building a permanent infrastructure of monitoring, much of which is operated by a private company that future councils will inherit, expand, and reinterpret under very different circumstances than today. So the question before us is not, can we regulate this well? It's, should we build this kind of system at all? And this, again, doesn't eliminate the importance of the surveillance ordinance. It's trying to refocus on the question of Axon, because voting on this, yes, on this ordinance means we're approving the Axon contract. And I, again, feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. Because once surveillance becomes normal, once the cameras are in place and the data is flowing, the debate shifts from whether we should monitor to only how much we monitor. And history tells us those lines almost always move in one direction. So again, I recommend that we vote, well, that's for Monday's meeting. That's my thoughts. Those are my questions.
Through the chair, I don't have a Cicero quote. I could quote Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. That's my Jurassic Park one. But I will say tonight was very productive. There's a lot of good information that came from the public, a lot of good questions. We have a lot of work to do. This was informative. I like the idea of trying to work all of this in. We heard repeatedly that 30 days is too long. We heard repeatedly that this feels toothless. I think that there are things that we can take away from this to make this stronger, and I don't think that there is a rush. I think that we are at a place where we are being thoughtful. This was an attempt at being thoughtful tonight as well, and we want to make the right choices, and we want to do what the public wants us to do and what's right for the public. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you all coming out tonight, and if you saw me scribbling notes while you were talking, just know that that's my attempt to write and capture what you've put out tonight and hopefully add it in.
For the chair, I want to thank you all for coming out. You gave us a lot to think about. We heard a lot of comments and questions around this ordinance, especially about the guardrails, the technology itself, and the broader climate we're operating in. I think many of you know here I've been opposed from this type of surveillance from the beginning, and nothing I've heard tonight changes my concern that this ordinance is not strong enough, period. If we're going to move forward with something this serious, we can't do it with so many unanswered questions and such weak protections. We need an ordinance that truly puts our civil liberties, community trust, and accountability first. So thank you, Councilmember Mikulski and Johnson, for the work. And I think we have a lot more work to do here and discussions to be had.
All right. Well, I can't say any more than what's been said as far as more work to be done. That's clear. And that's what we're going to do. More work needs to be done. The time frame for that, I don't have for you, because it's a lot of work that needs to be done. So, are there any other questions or comments from council at all regarding this draft reading?
I have 3 pages of typed notes to contribute to.
Okay. With that being said, then we've just got so off kilter as far as how we normally run meetings, so, yeah, the meeting's just adjourned. All right, then we will adjourn this meeting at